Hare Krishna. Thank you. It's a problem if it's too close, then I can't see the book. Okay. Hare Krishna. Go Haribol. Jayam Vishnupad Paramansa Paripajapachara Josta Tarasata Sisiman. His Divine Grace Sisi Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinde Ki Jai. ISKCON founder Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Prem Sikho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Śiva Sari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sai Mukunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sri Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Sri Guru Gauranga Nitai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nivase Sasanyavadi Praskatya Deshatarane Om Agyanataminandasya Janasana Salakaya Chaksusumilatan Zena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manabhistam Stapitam Zena Bhutale Sayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Sahapadantikam Vansakalpatruvascha Kripasindubheva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. How many of you are having a deep ekadasi? Of course, no one will raise their hands, but a very valuable day. So, especially meant for chanting and hearing about Krishna. And previously we were reading about the 18th chapter from the 10th canto, which is the 18th chapter of the Krishna book, about the cowherd pastimes of Krishna, when he's already a cowherd boy. In the 15th chapter, he begins to take out the cows for the first time. And there's a 3-day ceremony, and it's very wonderfully described by our acharyas. And then, more or less immediately, the Leela of Kaliya, where Krishna chastises Kaliya and removes him from the waters of the Jamuna. And then there's a forest fire, and then Krishna begins taking out the cows further, and he takes them across the Yamuna, and this is where this pastime takes place. He takes them across to the Yamuna, to the other side of the Yamuna, this side where the Vrindavan pastimes, the Vrindavan forest, is considered Krishna's side of the Yamuna. This is the eastern side. And then on the western side is more Balaram's side of the Yamuna. And since this is Balaram Hall, so I decided to read something where Balaram gets the opportunity to kill Pralambāsura. But before that happens, there's some very, very sweet dealings between Krishna and his cowherd boys and Balaram, because when the boys and Krishna go to the forest, you know what they do? Of course they do many things, but they simply play. They have a good time and they play, and they play so many wonderful games. But the main essence, the essential point in their playing is that they are dealing with Krishna. And they, being beloved Gopa cowherd boys, they have, their lives are simply full of Krishna. Earlier, it's described how if Krishna would, in the midst of the playing, wander off somewhere, just to be separated from Krishna just for a moment, practically speaking, the cowherd boys would find that intolerable. Just imagine the kind of love and taste for Krishna's association that they had, that the cowherd boys and the Braja Gopikas, when they would blink their eyes, Namesha, when they would blink their eyes, they would criticize their eyes for that short moment of the eye closing. They could not see Krishna. It's not even noticeable, practically speaking. But just that moment of not being able to see Krishna was almost impossible for them to tolerate. Just, we can't imagine, but just try to get a glimpse of what the spiritual world is like. It is like, it's just love for Krishna. Just love for Krishna. And Krishna is the center. And there are no competitors. Everyone agrees on this one point, that Krishna is the center. He is the center of everyone's love, the center of everyone's life. And it's completely swabhavika. What does swabhavika mean? Natural. Thank you. Completely natural. It is spontaneous and completely natural. This is what the residents of Vṛndāvana are made out of, practically speaking, love for Krishna. So when the cowherd boys go with Krishna, they just play and they have so much fun. Sometimes the gopis come by with their milk products, and the cowherd boys and Krishna would stop them and harass them and give them trouble and tax them. But that's a whole different kind of pastime, but it would happen during these pastimes as well. The boys would sometimes cross rivers, the Jamuna River, and play different games. And continuously they were playing with no anxiety because they were with Krishna. And that was everything to them. And when they would come back at night, and that was the period of the ending of the sadness. The nighttime was the period of the ending of the sadness of Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj, because Krishna would be with them. But it was the beginning of the sadness of the cowherd boys, because they wouldn't see Krishna for hours and hours. Intolerable. So intolerable that they couldn't tolerate it. And they would imagine the sun coming up continuously during the night. And a cowherd boy would come to Krishna's room, not his room, but outside his room, and say, Krishna, 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 come. You're late, let's go now, in the middle of the night. And Mother Yashoda would wake up and say, my dear boy, can't you see that it's dark out now? You'll see Krishna soon, but you have to wait for the sun to rise. Oh my, I'm so sorry, I didn't notice. And then he would go back to his place, and then after a few minutes or a few hours, then another boy, he would come back, oh Krishna, oh Krishna. This is the nature of the spiritual world. It is all attractive because Krishna is all attractive. So while the cowherd boys were in the forest and playing, even though their parents would dress them with gems and jewelry and fine cloth. When they were in the forest of Vrindavan, they would take the forest flowers and decorate themselves, and the boys would make garlands for Krishna, and they would decorate Krishna's face with just like we see with Krishna Balarāma, we see with Radha and even Gaurnatai, that how their faces are so delicate. What do we call those? What do we call them? Gopi dots, but they're not really gopi dots when they're on Krishna or on Balarāma, but we call them gopi dots. But they would just delicately place the dots on Krishna's, and they'd all think, like every pujari does, that I've decorated Krishna better than anyone else. And there's a truth in that, in the sense that when you serve Krishna, he reveals to you a special beauty of his, a portion of his beauty. He has unlimited beauty, and he reveals that specially to those who love and serve him. So the boys would decorate Krishna, and there'd be unlimited boys, and each one of them would want to decorate Krishna, and each one would think that my decoration is the best. And how is Krishna going to deal with that? Because he has the capacity to satisfy everyone, while we don't have this capacity to, practically speaking, to satisfy anyone. You're laughing. Have you noticed that? So Krishna sometimes will expand himself into so many Krishnas, so that the boys would have an opportunity to, each one could decorate him. And when Krishna would go to a faraway place, just for a moment, the boys would run to Krishna and think, who knows what they would say? No, that's not what they would say. They would say, Aham Purvan, that I want to be first to touch Krishna, to be with Krishna. But it was all in the spirit of affection and friendly rivalry, and this is the nature of the way that boys play. So one of the games, well, I'll read a little bit and see where we were up to. They walked into the midst of newly grown leaves of trees whose flowers resembled peacock feathers. So the Vrindavan forest, each of the different trees, the birds, the creepers, the grass, the deer, the animals, they would see, now is my time to make my offering to Krishna. So what would they offer? The birds would offer their sweet singing. The breezes would go over the lakes. This took place in the summer season, where it's very, very, very hot. So the breezes would go over the lakes that were filled with very fragrant lotus flowers and carry that fragrance and fill the entire forest of Vrindavan with that fragrance. And the trees when Krishna would come, they would blossom forward with their flowers that would also be so fragrant. And the bees would make their sounds, their buzzing sounds, that would fill the atmosphere. So each of the senses of Krishna, Krishna's skin would be touched by the breezes and cooled by the breezes. And therefore the breezes were so happy. And Krishna's nostrils would be intoxicated by all the different fragrances. And Krishna's ears would be filled with the sound, the different sounds of the forest. And in this way, what sense did I miss? Eyes, the beautiful scenery that Vrindadevi and her servants would would place forward always something new in the forest, and the trees would be with their flowers, etc. So in this way, the forest would make it its offering for Krishna. It was more or less like the setting of a stage for and the stage is set for the dealings between Krishna and the residents of Vrindavan. It's all a setting for the great pastimes, the great dramas that take place in the forest of Vrindavan. So the trees whose flowers resembled peacock feathers, they were garlanded. Krishna and Balarāma and the cowherd boys were garlanded by those flowers, and they were decorated with saffron chalk from the Govardhan hill. Very often had the different chalks and different minerals, colored minerals, that Giriraj Govardhan would be able to supply. And there are some places at Govardhan where you could just take some water and you could just rub it and get some different colors like that. So sometimes they were dancing and singing and sometimes wrestling with each other, because the singing came just naturally and spontaneously. Because, does anyone know why? Where did it come from? Their joy, their natural joy and happiness would cause them to sing. So the boys would always be singing and joking and playing. And sometimes they would be dancing. And Krishna, of course, was the best of dancers. What's Krishna's name that means the number one dancer, the best of dancers? Vṛndāvana. Krishna, the first of dancers. So I'll read a little more and then tell you a pastime that Srila Jiva Goswami describes in more detail. The outlines are given here in Krishna book and Srimad Bhagavatam, but Srila Jiva Goswami expands on some of these and describes some of the actual playing, the kinds of playing that the boys do. So they would sometimes wrestle also with one another. While Krishna danced, some of the cowherd boys sang, and others played on flutes, and some bugled on buffalo horns, so that they had their buffalo horns, because the cowherd boys always had with them sticks, horns, and what else? Flutes tucked in their different belts. And they would bugle on the horns and play their flutes, and they would use the sticks to herd the cows, but they would never beat the cows with their sticks, of course. But they would use them to herd the cows. And they clapped their hands praising Krishna when Krishna was dancing. They would say, "Dear brother, you are dancing very nicely, sadhu sadhu." Actually, all these boys were devatas, demigods, who were descended from higher planets to assist Krishna in his pastimes. They weren't ordinary persons. They were the most exalted souls. The demigods, dressed garbed in the dress of the cowherd boys, were encouraging Krishna in his dancing. Sometimes it says that Garuda would come and dress as a cowherd boy, and Narada Muni sometimes, and the different devatas would take on these different roles because they wanted to taste the sweetness of being with Krishna. And when Krishna was dancing, they would encourage him with praise, just as one artist encourages another. Up to that time, neither Balarāma nor Krishna had undergone the hair-cutting ceremony, and therefore their hair was clustered like crow's feathers. And then it describes some of the games that they played. But I wanted to mention something about their dancing and wrestling and playing and singing and some of the games that they played. Naturally, of course, they were boys. They were competitive games. And sometimes they would be fighting and stealing each other's lunches. And when a boy would cry, they would laugh. Because I've seen this. Of course, we all grew up in this. But one time I was waiting for the darshan in the Vṛndāvana temple in Sriji Mandir. The temple doors were closed, and there was a group of about 15 to 20 local Brijbazi boys outside waiting for the darshan. And some of them were big and older, maybe 12, 13, and some of them were like 5 or 6. And they were playing in one group, and they were it was like a spontaneous chaos of playing. And they were pushing each other, and sometimes one group would form against another group, and they would chase them, and the big ones would beat the little ones, and the little ones would cry and cry. But just for a moment, and then as soon as that was finished, a different group would form, and this group would fight with that group, and they'd wrestle, and they would play different games and chase each other, just continuously, one thing after the next, always changing what they were doing. So that's the kind of thing that Kṛṣṇa, the cowherd boys, were continuously doing with Kṛṣṇa in the center. And one of the types of games that they would do is they would divide up into different groups. And in one group, Kṛṣṇa would be the king. And another group, Balarāma would be the king. And a different boy, like Stoka Kṛṣṇa, would be Kṛṣṇa's minister. And another boy would be Balarāma's minister. And then they have armies, and sometimes there'd be another group of boys over here, and they would make politics against that group. And sometimes they would plot and scheme and attack one group, and sometimes they would make friends with each other and just be playing in that way. So, and this is all going on while the cows are wandering and tasting the sweet grasses, even though it was summer, even though it was the summer season, which dries out the forests of Vrindavan. But during Krishna's time, because Madhu was there, because Kṛṣṇa was there, it was just like Madhu, which also means springtime. So everything, the forest was always green, and there was fresh grasses. So all this playing is going on as the cows are wandering here and there. And at this time, they were quite close to Vrindavan, where the great Bandira tree was there. That was so huge, it would cross to the other side of the Jamuna. It would go all the way to the other side of the Jamuna, to the eastern side. And of course, the cowherd boys would climb the tree sometimes and jump into the water, and lotuses and fragrance. So wonderful. So one time, Sridham, Vasudam, and Sudam, they wandered off a little bit to look at their cows or look at something. They wandered a little distance from Kṛṣṇa. And then Kṛṣṇa, very full of suspense. What did Kṛṣṇa do? Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma, Arjuna and Subal Saka, they came in a different mood. They saw that Sridham and Vasudam and Sudam were in one mood, and they came in a mood of dancing. And they danced in a graceful way right before them, right before the other group. So Sridham immediately got into the play, the drama of what was going on. So he said, "Oh, it appears that you've come from a great distance. Why have you come?" As if they were, one kingdom was over here, and these were representatives of some other kingdom or something like that. So he said, "Oh, we've come because this forest." And Krishna began to glorify the forest of Vrindavan. He said that, unfortunately, I can't remember the exact words, but it's so sweet, that this forest has given life to my nostrils, my nose, because of its fragrance. And it's given life to my ears because of the wonderful sounds. And given life, the breezes have given life to my skin. And the birds and the other sounds have given life to my ears. And because all my senses are so enlivened, my mind is enlivened. And because my mind is enlivened, my heart is filled with joy. And because my heart is filled with joy, what can my feet not do? So we've come here with one request, and that is to dance before you. So Sridham and Vasudam and who else? Sudam said, "Very nice, you can dance before us." And Krishna began dancing. And the boys, being very expert, they used to take different leaves and roll up the leaves and turn those leaves into little flutes, and they would somehow find some logs and play drums, and all the other boys gathered around, and they would play instruments, and the boys, when Krishna started dancing in such a graceful, wonderful way, because he's already dressed as a dancer. This comes out in many places of the Bhagavatam. The way he dresses is like a dramatic artist. And what is the sense of the way a person on stage dances? He has to be dressed differently, and he has to be dressed to attract everyone's attention. So Krishna, with his peacock feather in his head, and the karnika flowers over here, and gundi earrings, and his face painted, and his yellow cloth, and he's dancing in the most graceful way. And when the boys see Krishna's dancing, they all start singing and playing instruments. And Balaram immediately joins in with the dancing. So Krishna and Balaram are dancing together. And Srila Jiva Goswami explains that you can't tell the difference between their dancing and the different styles and the different intricate movements that they're doing between Krishna and Balaram, except one is darkish in color and one is lightish in color. And Balaram is wearing blue and Krishna gold and cloth. So they're dancing and dancing, and all the boys are in such happiness. So when they stop dancing, all Sridham, Sudam, and Vasudam, they just say, "Sadhu, sadhu, well done, well done, well done. You've done so well, and by your dancing, you've brought so much happiness to our hearts. You've come from so far," because they're playing. They're all playing. "You've come from so far. We don't know who you are, but you've come from so far. Whatever you want, whatever you desire, whatever you ask for, we'll give you. What do you want?" Of course, the boys actually and they start taking off the bracelets and the necklaces that their mothers had dressed them with, and Krishna said, "No, we have not come for these kind of jewels. we only want one thing. What is that one thing that you want? We want to wrestle with you. So then the boys start wrestling with each other, and they're wrestling and beating each other and slapping each other, but all in fun, of course. And they're pulling each other's hair even, and slapping each other's cheeks, and laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing. And finally, Śrīdam says to Krishna, please, you've just exhibited the most wonderful dancing. Could you please give us some dancing lessons? So Krishna, of course, agrees. So who taught Krishna to dance? Huh? Did the peacock teach Krishna to dance, or did Krishna teach the peacock to dance? But in any case, Krishna gave Śrīdam some dancing lessons. And what the kind of dancing lessons is, how do you deal with different kinds of rhythms? And of course, there's the different movements, and what to do with your eyes at different times, and how to keep your face in this way, and because every movement has meaning. But the most difficult part of dancing is when the rhythm changes, when the different taals and rhythm changes. And then you have to change the way your feet are hitting the ground and moving and everything like that. So Krishna gave Śrīdam some dancing lessons. And then Krishna tested Śrīdam. And Krishna gave him a very difficult test, and he changed the rhythms and made some very complicated rhythms. And therefore, there is one verse where Krishna says, and this verse is in the chapter in the Bhagavatam in the Sanskrit, sometimes while his friends were chanting and dancing, Krishna would praise them. My dear friends, you are dancing and singing very nicely. So Srila Jiva Goswami explains that this is actually referring to how Śrīdam did very well on Krishna's test, and the complicated rhythms that he put before Śrīdam, and Krishna appreciated and said, very good, you have done very well, you have learned everything. So they play that for a while, and then they change, and then they take different fruits, and that's what's described next. The boys played catching ball with fruits such as bale fruit and amalaka fruit. And this you'll see sometimes, even with the devotees, the men devotees, that if they're walking along very sober, even brahmacharis, and then if somehow a ball goes by, they can't resist. They start kicking the ball. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes. It's just the nature of the way boys are. So they were taking the fruits, and sometimes they would throw the fruits in the air, not the microphones, but the fruits into the air, and then they would hit the fruits with other fruits, and sometimes they would throw them at each other, and sometimes they would just play catching the fruits and things like this. And this way they would be playing. They played at catching ball with fruits, such as bale and amalaka. They played blind man's bluff, challenging and touching one another, where they would blindfold one of the boys, and then another boy would go from behind him, and just by the touch of the boy's palm, the boy who was blindfolded would have to guess who it was. And just imagine if you were there and you're blindfolded, and Krishna took his palms and put them right on your eyes, and his fragrance would be right there. And sometimes they would call the different cows by their names, and each of the boys had different cows, and they all had different names. And Krishna would call his cows, and the boys would call their cows. And in this way, they just were playing and playing and playing. They challenged and touched one another. Sometimes they imitated forest deer and other kinds of birds. And I remember Dinabandhu Prabhu, he could imitate so many of the different birds. I don't know if there are any good bird imitators here. Peacocks? Any peacocks in the... Peacock with a cough. Okay, peacocks, please. Oh, that's nice. Okay, some peacocks and some cows. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, we want to hear. That's the peacock, right? Okay, we need some cows too. Peacocks, cows, and then there's quail, and peacocks and cows. I mean, and the boys would be doing this, and we're all laughing. It's just so much fun. And what other birds are there? Dinabandhu knows, Prabhu knows so many of the birds. Maybe next time we'll have him lead us in a chorus. We'll start a symphony, a forest symphony. They joke with one another by imitating croaking frogs. We won't bother with that one right now. And they enjoyed swinging underneath the trees. There would be different branches, and they'd swing on the trees. And they would play amongst themselves, king and their subjects. In this way, Balarāma and Kṛṣṇa, along with all their friends, played all kinds of sports and enjoyed the soothing atmosphere of the Vrindavan forest, full of rivers, lakes, small rivers, fine trees, and excellent gardens filled with fruits and flowers. Yes. And then tomorrow, Krishna willing, the next part of the pastime begins. Maybe you shouldn't come because it is very frightening, because one demon named Pralambāsura will try to kill Krishna and Balarāma. But I will give you a hint. Don't worry, that Krishna and Balarāma will always win. So you can come, even if you're a little bit afraid. Thank you. Any questions or comments on what we read or what we heard? Or anyone want to add something wonderful about the cowherd boy pastimes? Yes. Your question was, how can we develop this always being with Krishna and always thinking of him? Of course, the answer is very simple to understand, and that is, all you have to do is fall in love with Krishna. Then you'll always naturally think about him. That's one way. Another way is you could be like Kamsa. He always was thinking about Krishna too, but there's no parampara on that side, so we don't go there. No, our whole process is exactly that. Exactly that. I was reading yesterday, perhaps, about in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was speaking to the Mayavadis of Benares, and in one of Prabhupada's purports he said that the essence of the sadhana is hearing about Krishna. So when we hear about Krishna, perhaps within our heart a little bit of desire to actually be with Krishna, and that's the essence of the beginning, that we want Krishna Bhule Se Jiva Nade Bahimukh, a turning to Krishna. We want to turn to Krishna. So that's what the purpose of sadhana bhakti is. Nitya sadasya bhavasya prakastamriddhi sadyata. So let me ask you a question. What, more than anything else, you personally, what helps you think about Krishna more and more?
Hearing about him.
Yes. And what pastimes do you like to hear about? Now, you don't have to answer, but what pastimes do you like to hear about?
Krishna dancing on Korea.
I couldn't hear.
Krishna dancing on Korea.
How wonderful. There are two pastimes in Vrindavan that are especially dear to all the devotees in Braj. And that is Krishna dancing on Kaliya, and what's the other one? Govardhan Leela. Why? Because everyone could be there, and everyone would just focus their full consciousness on Krishna. But yet, it's not just Santaras who are focused on Krishna, but no mood of service. It's with a desire to somehow be with Krishna and serve him, and the residents of Vrindavan and that Kaliya Leela, Krishna Kaliya Leela, they were in so much anxiety when they saw that Krishna was enwrapped in the coils. No one thought that Krishna is so powerful, there's no problem, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No, because of their love. Because of their love, they were in so much anxiety, and that anxiety about Krishna forced every other thought out of their mind in that sense. Thank you, a wonderful question. What makes you think about Krishna more than anything else? And what do you like to hear about? Okay, so give me an example of one.
I used to say, Krishna book you can buy to eat everywhere. It's always.
So where would you like to bite right now?
We can continue.
I feel like this is a tennis match. Okay. And then there's, of course, kirtan. If one engages in chanting, in sankirtan, for many hours, then naturally that kirtan goes on in your mind continuously until you open up your phone and get onto your Facebook app. Okay, are there any last question? Because we'll end exactly at 8. Yes, Paul.
What should the proper rule be like approach to reading the Krishna book? Because you can sit and take each sentence and speak so long, but if one hasn't heard all these descriptions of the acharyas, it's easy to read this in just a few minutes and go to the next. So how to dive deeper, I guess.
How does that?
How to dive deeper.
But that is deep. I mean, I remember one time in Japan, Trivikram Maharaj, His Holiness Trivikram Swami, went into Prabhupada's room and he was reading a Krishna book. I know another devotee, an old devotee, disciple of Prabhupada, recently told me that he said, well, the book that I'm enjoying most nowadays is Krishna book. So I think it's not exactly in that it's not like you're lacking anything if it's the Krishna book. It's because what's the real essence of it, of the book, is to watch the relationship, the dealings between Krishna, the loving dealings between Krishna and his devotees. The Brijvasis there and here in this part of the Krishna book. So it's really reading, looking for the rasa, for the sweetness in the dealings, and try to understand what it is about Krishna that attracts everyone. And what is he doing that's so wonderful? And why is it that all the Vrindavan Vasis are attracted to him? So read with some thinking and with some depth and some questioning perhaps. Because otherwise it can sound so simple. The boys are playing, Krishna's hair was like this and they're throwing fruits. But if you read the comments of the acharyas, it could also sound so simple, because they won't say anything else, they'll just tell some more details. But to read with some understanding of why this is the spiritual world and why the material world is a reflection of that, and what's the difference. And also Prabhupada will put in so many amazing things. Or even the point that the forest of Vrindavan, it's all wanting to make their offerings. Every entity wants to make their offering to Krishna. And that's really the key of spiritual life, in one sense, because we as individuals have an offering to make, because an individual means that you're different from every other individual. So you have an offering to make to Krishna that no one else can give. Would you like to know what that is? Yeah, it develops. And that's who you are, actually. You're a person who is meant to offer myself to Krishna with great love and devotion for Krishna's pleasure. So this is the perfection that the cowherd boys have. Itam satam brahma sukha anubhutya dasyam gataram nara daivatena maya sritanam narapangavena sakyam vicharu krita punja punja. They haven't achieved this position just overnight, but by it's taking them many, many births of pious activities. And what does that mean? It means increasing desire to be with Krishna. So much so that all our other desires become very pale and insignificant. The fire of our desire to be with Krishna in service will melt the hard ice blocks of our selfishness and hard-heartedness. I don't know if I answered your question. Okay, good night, and Krishna willing, we shall continue tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Krishna ki jai, Srila Prabhupada Bhaktavinda ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hare Hare Bol. Toma,